Hey everybody, this is PD from the Spinner Rack, and we're finally doing a New Mutants review with all the buzz that online, the New Mutants becoming a sleeper hit. And I guess Disney and I mean, yes, any company sort of needs sort of money at this point, which is very good, right? So with that said, what should I talk about with this? Um, Ultimately, the New Mutants with the title was this? Hmm. Guess you could say this is one of the first spin-offs of the X-Men. We had also the Alpha Flight. I had to figure out which was first. I believe it was New Mutants. But the New Mutants was pretty much the first spin-off of the X-Men. Um, they were introduced to Rain, Danny Moonstar. Yeah, there's Bobby. Oh man, I'm blowing this. I don't need a cheat sheet. I need a cheat sheet for this. I can't remember the mutants' names. Ileana Rasputin. Who else? Bobby is Brazilian, so I need to make sure of his last name. Obviously created by, let's go to this thing here. New Mutants Wikipedia to help me out, to get me through this hard stage that I'm having right now. Let's let's see. I mean, because I know their names: Cannonball, obviously Sunspot, Wolf's Bane, um, Mirage, Karma, who's not in it, and obviously Magic, who's in the movie. But let me make sure the names I don't remember. Cannonball, his name is Sam Gumbel. Yeah, that's what I believe. So if you go to Sunspot, his name is Roberto DaCosta. I keep saying Bobby, but that's probably why I screwed that up. So I'm going to keep going though. That said, so we had it was a hit. It was a top 10 comic book when it first started out. It was created by Chris Claremont and Bob McLeod. Then it was I think who was it? Sal Buscema took over for a while when it got into double digits, and then there was a big run by Bill Sienkiewicz that started around 18, which had the Demon Bear saga, and then had many other had Warlock. I think which we also had a TV show of not Warlock, but of name is Legion. I think Legion with Legions. The name Legion was actually given Chris Claremont. John Byrne gave that name to Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont was going to call him Psycho. Soon after that, there was a couple of artists that took over after Bill Sienkiewicz, but the effect of Bill Sienkiewicz's time was affected. Art Adams did a couple of issues. No, he did one annual, so special, and then he did covers. So he was someone we were thinking was going to do the New Mutants at some point, but it didn't actually happen. Jackson Geist took over for a little while. Chris Claremont leaves somewhere after issue 50, and Louise Simonson takes over. When Louise Simonson takes over, I mean, the cast is, they've added Magma. Obviously, they added Doug Ramsey. There's a few other characters that come into the title as it goes along. The characters from X Factor that join, Rusty and Skids. And then, later on there's Cable. But while Louise was doing it, there's Brett Belvins who joined Louise for a pretty decent run on the title. And that point, the book was shifting between top 10 to top 25. You have issues where Magneto goes bad. I think that's like 74, 75. That was a big issue. That's in the top 10. What other issues is going on? But then, because there's a myth that the sales were in the toilet, and it just wasn't always number two when all of the big Marvel successes were happening. When the big Marvel successes start to happen, you have what is it? You have 2 months of Spider-Man, 2 months of X-Men. Sorry, no, X-Men twice a month, Spider-Man twice a month, Wolverine twice a month. So that sort of pushed some titles down. But I think X Factor stayed in its top 10 or even top 5. But at the same time, you had also these events that were going on. So at times, the New Year's also would pick up with the events, with the fall of the mutants, the massive mutant massacre. You also had Inferno, all those issues were top 10 issues also. So, but then you had Rob Liefeld came. Now, if it was a top 10 or top 25 book, when Rob Liefeld comes, it's a top 2 and top 3. There's big buzz behind Rob Liefeld, but at the same time, what happened? At the same time, you had these number 1 issues happening. So I think on Rob's observation, kind of says he got on that bus. The book didn't necessarily need to, because Fabian Nicienza, he says that the Marvel office wasn't really interested in taking a top 10 book and giving it a new number 1, saying, why would we already have the sales. We're doing a duplicate title for the X-Men. We're not renumbering the original X-Men numbers. And they kind of go with it, and they get the big, I think it's 4.5 million sales on X-Force. But we're going to stick to the New Mutants. The New Mutants, which was a successful Marvel, and as I said, top 10, top 20. So this movie is based on the Demon Bear saga. I'll see how far I've gone. Anything going on here? So this is going with the Demon Bear saga. So it starts off with the Demon Bear attacking Danny Moonstar's family. So, and then after such a dramatic open, she ends up in the hospital. Now, gratefully, this review is going to have a lot of spoilers, or there's mainly 2 spoilers. But to give you guys a sell for why you should see this, because it's ultimately just a fun movie. It's nothing big, it's not earth-shattering, it's just fun. The characters are fun. I mean, I guess we could backtrack to say that Roberto da Costa doesn't necessarily look like the character from the comic book, or his shade, his complexion is off. But Professor Reyes' complexion is off also. She had dreads, she's brown skin, but this is also Hollywood. So not to say that they did anything right by changing the complexion, because they didn't, that's totally wrong. But you can see with Sam Gunther, Bob McLeod gave Sam Gunther a distinct face, and that's been changed too. So if you have issue with casting, well, I mean, you have Wolverine that's 6 foot, over 6 feet in the X-Men movies, and nobody had a problem with it. So I would like people to just be consistent, because they go for the easy stuff and say, hey, look at Robert DaCosta. He's a white Brazilian, where he's supposed to be a darker skinned Brazilian, right? And they have issue with that. No one remembered Dr. Reyes because she had such a short shelf life. But I mean, the artist Bob McLeod, I'm totally with him, being such the character, the sort of the features, how he drew them were very distinct. So I can definitely, I feel upset. I don't like that they changed his faces, and he should be upset. But this is now a mix of the Bill Sienkiewicz New Mutants and the Bob McLeod mutants. So there's been changes across the board. Now, Bill Sienkiewicz didn't change the faces, but he changed the look altogether. So Danny Moonstar wakes up in this hospital, but she knows that her family's dead, right? So at this point, she's in the hospital. And this is my first spoiler is say that this is direct connection to Logan. So if you're a fan of Logan, they were, the 20th Century Fox people were giving you hints of what happened in Logan, what happened to these kids, and some of the stuff that could have happened to them. So if you're a fan of that, this is another good reason to check out this movie, right? So, oh my gosh. I just got a question. Why? What? So Zoltar, I don't know if I've met Zoltar in person. It's possible, but so with that said, um, what happened? So if you like Logan, you can connect to this movie, right? So you have Danny Moonstar in this handcuffs, she can't leave, and she meets the not you know, but not actually team of new mutants. She meets Ileana, she meets Rain, um, Robert DeCosta's kind of walking around there, and then who else do you have? You have Sam Gunther. So while she's walking around, she sees Sam practicing his power that he's blasting off. You see the Ileana being sort of the bad girl. Now in the comic book, Ileana has two personalities. You know, not that she's a split personality. She's friend to Kitty Pryde, and she's just a regular girl. And in the New Mutants, she's this hard-edged Russian woman, girl that's like real tough on the girl. So she and Chris Claremont wrote her totally different in these books, and that could be something where you could see sort of like a Danny from what's that movie from Greece? That with when he's with Sandy, he's one way, and when he's with his friends, he's a different way. So, um, I mean, I just said Zoltar saying, watch this afterwards. So I'll tell you where I mean, if you were like Logan, that's not really a spoiler, right? That's not a spoiler. So I'm going to leave the big spoiler at the end. So I'm going to tell you when to get off, right? The big spoiler is at the end, right? So basically, if you watch the trailer, there's all this horror show, and this is supposed to be connected to like doing sort of horror mutant thing. And this is not strange for the New Mutants or the X-Men. If you look at the X-Men, I think in what was it? In the first series, the first couple of issues, there's some sort of horror thing that's going on, something chasing stuff. Who's it? Danny is very scared throughout the comic book, and the movie plays out that same way. And then, but there's in the X-Men there was the Sleazoids, but in this there's something in these sort of apparitions and this sort of dream sequences that are happening. And since the opening has seeming like a dream sequence, but even though her family died, which is real, we're trying to connect what's real and what's not, right? So Danny has these terrible nightmares. What's the name? Dr. Reyes is kind of watching their progress, but of course, while they're sleeping, everything goes crazy. Now, I would say with the movie did the right thing adding Ileana because she's one of the more dynamic. I also like Magma, who's dynamic. I mean, I was a fan of Karma, who also is a mind to control minds, but at the same time, so she was a favorite. So, but she's not in this, and having people that are so many mental sort of characters with mental powers, that might be a little too much. So in this story, we get to see a lot of banter between them. The only problem with the banter is what's the name? Bobby seems to be doing the dishes like a little too much. Like he's constantly doing dishes, and you don't see these kids eating. I don't know if Dr. Reyes just got like a chow line or something like going on, but Bobby, some reason. But you see the connection between Bobby and Sam Gunther. You see Ileana, being the bad girl. You see Rain and Danny sort of connected. And in the comic, they connected as friends. But there's always, and this is a spoiler about the X-Men and Chris Claremont's characters. The female characters kind of go both ways, right? So Danny, I think, could possibly have gone both ways. And Rain, I don't think Rain was one that had a lot of struggles. Now in this, they're kind of reversed because Danny has just lost her parents. So at this time, she's the one that's in need of the most help. Too much information. That's not that much information. Talk about Danny, what's the name doing the dishes. Anyway, um, ultimately, we just see them struggling with these apparitions and stuff that's going on. And as it goes on, they hint and they talk about the whole Weapon X Logan stuff with the kids and all that stuff that's happening. So, I mean, I don't know. what else can I give you to not say? I'm saying this is a thing of you guys should go check it out. Just a good, just regular movie to watch. But with that said, we got over the hump. This is where Zoltar has to go. This is where the big spoilers is going to happen. Because if you watch the trailer and you didn't figure this out, and I didn't figure it out, which I should have, um, you know. But here we go. Since Ileana gets confronted by these things from her past, Bobby has this thing where he loses control. I forget, something happens with Sam in the mines. In Rain, I don't think anything sort of bad happens to her. So all this stuff is piling up. And Ileana, this is spoilers again, Ileana sort of figures out where it's coming from. And then they start to see one character as the bad guy. But Rain doesn't look at this character as a bad guy. But then of course there's the bear. And the bear comes and is like huge. So like the Demon Bear saga is basically taking sort of this Neil Adams large bear story where the bear is a movie poster where the bear is huge, but at the same time, when Bill Sienkiewicz sort of translated it, the the mummies are this size and the bear is like this size. So it's a very visual sort of character thing. But this was Danny's mortal enemy. And when Danny fights the demon bear in the comics, Danny, who can bring out your biggest fear, Danny brings herself. It's a mirage of herself. And then the bear's like strikes at it. But that is to say that Danny in the comics has never had the most visual power. She creates your greatest fear, but the power is not visual at all. Every artist, Bob McLeod, Bill Sienkiewicz, I think burned for 2 seconds using their power, and they constantly added all this other stuff to her. They made her a Valkyrie, they gave her a horse with wings, they gave her all this extra stuff to sort of compensate for having a mirage of creating the greatest fear, which somehow people can look past. And the success, what the movie did right was say, Danny's power would be the most visual thing and the scariest thing that you would see. And that's what this thing, the whole plot is around. That her power is being fully realized on film and translated brilliantly. So I have to give them a nod for that because they really took her power and they visualized it. And that's one of the things the comics struggle with doing because they just say, oh, it's a mirage. So basically, it's just like, it'll just go away. It's nothing to be afraid of. Where the movie made the characters afraid of this thing. You see Ileana fighting Danny, trying to scare Danny, and Danny's powers come into play, like a fight or flight. She comes up with Ileana's, who has been unflappable this entire time. She gets scared, and then she's trying to kill us. But ultimately, they go off. It'd been interesting if they kind of switched this and had, I always want to add Rose Byrne, had Maura McTaggart in there. That would have been interesting, but they were ending this. They kind of pick and choose when they want to use Maura McTaggart, but she could have been in the Days of the Future Past, which she should have been in. Should have been in this. They should have done a last X-Men movie with her, a big point, instead of doing the Phoenix thing. But ultimately, we got the kids together and their friendships and their banter. So ultimately, I hadn't really connected with the comic that much. I liked the art in it. Most of all the artists that I named are all quality artists. So, I think on the other side, Rob Liefeld, he had the promise of becoming like a fully realized Art Adams clone. So if you look at Rob Liefeld's, his first drawings of the New Mutants were actually swipes of stuff Art Adams did in the classic X-Men. So if you look at that stuff, you're like, oh sweat, I'm on the ground floor with the Art Adams clone. The same like if I would be like when I was a kid, I was on the ground floor, but I didn't know Neil Adams. But I liked Byrne's style. I didn't know that he was or Bill Sienkiewicz was a Neil Adams clone. That I would think Michael Nasser, a few others, Brent Anderson, that were these guys that were fans of Neil Adams that became these great artists on their own. So looking at Rob Liefeld's art, and there's a buzz around the stuff, and McFarlane inked the covers. It was like, we got this guy who's a Art Adams clone. What will he become when he starts to move off in his own way? The same way Byrne. People say Byrne he would do animation faces with Neil Adams' body, and then he decided to do animation everything. And that's where the kind of flip people didn't like. But it's him figuring out his own style. Same like I think Frank Miller was a Gil Kane clone, and you can see what Frank Miller became, or Perez is kind of curvy and Kurt Swan together. And, he hasn't necessarily changed his style that much except for his anatomy, and his dynamics is always strong, but his characterization, that's one thing that you can see in Perez where he really grew, even though the art is pretty much the same. So with and they also say with with Rob Liefeld, there was a promise of what he could become when he started to get the basics, keeping the backgrounds consistent, keeping the background, see if we can get to that point, learning anatomy, that sort of thing, drapery, that stuff. But he had pure energy. But ultimately, they really changed the face. And this one kept that there are three female characters and two guys. And this also, instead of having Xavier, where the other one had Marvin Taggart, you have Dr. Reyes. So you have this nice mix of mostly female characters and the guys. So this is a recommend to see it. I've pointed out where the spoilers are, but at the same time, I'm glad to hear that it's picked up because it's just a fun movie. It's nothing, you look at these Marvel and DC or Warner Brothers movies, and outside of the first Deadpool, there is sort of a formula to it. So this is giving you something a little different with characters. And I know it'll be interesting to see them in sort of the Negasonic Warrior costume, because that's a good translation of the original, the New Mutants / original X-Men costumes. But we'll see. I mean, they're not going to do any more, but they have the perfect Ileana in there. They have a decent Danny, a decent Rain. You could get a better Sam and what's the name, but they're moving on, and they're going to put this on the shelf and that sort of thing. But they get a little money coming in. So that's my review of this. There's no other comments. And what else do I want to say? I think I covered everything New Mutants wise. But that said, it was always the top 10, the top 25 hit. Anything in the top 25 is nothing to complain about. I think Rob Liefeld, no, I can't. 75 was big. I'm going into it again. Check it out, comment, and let me know if you liked it. Spinner Rack is out.